If you've never had to deal with a homeowners association, count yourself lucky. I bought my house precisely to avoid one. It was a charming 2-story place on the edge of a small town, backed up by a wide stretch of woods and fields, no shared amenities, no community board, and certainly no monthly fees for the privilege of being told how to live. I wanted peace. I wanted to work from home without someone measuring my grass height or sending letters about the shade of my shutters. For the first 6 months, that's exactly what I had, until Karen showed up. Her real name's irrelevant, her personality was pure textbook HOA president. The problem, there wasn't an HOA here. She lived in the neighboring subdivision, a cluster of manicured homes with a pool and a gatehouse, and she was apparently under the delusion that her jurisdiction extended beyond the gates. At first, her intrusions were petty, notes left on my mailbox about community paint standards or trash can visibility rules. I ignored them. Then came the day she stood on my porch, clipboard in hand, and announced, "You're behind on your HOA dues." I laughed, thinking it was a bizarre prank, but her face remained stone-cold serious. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with a joke. I was dealing with a woman who had convinced herself I was under her control. I tried explaining the reality to her, showed her my deed, pointed out that my property was not, in fact, part of her subdivision, and even offered to let her speak to the county assessor. But the more I proved her wrong, the more determined she became. It was as if my resistance was a personal insult. Within weeks, she escalated from verbal harassment to threats of legal action. She began sending what she called official violation notices in the mail, printed on letterhead she had clearly designed herself, complete with a logo and a P.O. box address. The violations were absurd: unauthorized exterior decor, because of a garden gnome; failure to submit landscaping plans, because I planted tomatoes; noise complaints, because my dog barked once when the mail truck came by. I filed every letter away, thinking I might need them someday. Then came the certified letter that made my jaw drop. It was an actual summons to small claims court. Karen was suing me for $3,500 in unpaid HOA dues and $1,200 in fines. The kicker: the complaint listed me as a resident of Oak Pines HOA, her neighborhood, which was a full half-mile away from my home. I knew this was ridiculous, but seeing my name on an official court document lit a fire under me. This wasn't just an annoying neighbor anymore, it was an attack that could stain my record if I didn't fight back. The weeks leading up to the court date were surreal. I gathered every scrap of evidence I had: the property plat map, my purchase agreement, the county's zoning records, and the letters Karen had sent me. My lawyer, Mark, a no-nonsense guy who'd dealt with overzealous HOAs before, looked through it all and shook his head in disbelief. "She has nothing. This is going to blow up in her face," he said. But he also warned me that people like Karen rarely back down voluntarily. "She's banking on intimidation. If you fold, she wins. If you fight, she's going to double down until someone in authority tells her she's wrong," loudly. I noticed in the days before court that Karen was strutting around town like she'd already won. I overheard her in the grocery store telling someone, "We have to keep the neighborhood up to standard. He thinks he's special, but he belongs under my rules." That little soundbite would come back to haunt her, but at the time, I just rolled my eyes and focused on preparing. The day before the hearing, she even had the nerve to send one last letter, warning me that failure to comply could lead to further legal consequences. I almost hoped she'd bring it to court. It was such blatant harassment it could only hurt her case. When the court date arrived, the small claims courtroom was buzzing. Karen was already there, flanked by 2 other HOA board members who looked like they'd been dragged in against their will. She had a stack of papers in front of her and an expression of smug righteousness that made me want to laugh. My lawyer and I took our seats, and almost immediately she started whispering loudly enough for me to hear, "This won't take long. He's in violation on multiple counts." The bailiff called us to order, and the judge, an older man with the air of someone who'd seen every petty dispute imaginable, asked Karen to present her case. She launched into a rambling speech about community cohesion and enforcement of standards, barely touching on actual evidence. When she did submit her documents, it was a mix of self-printed violation notices, a spreadsheet of supposed fines, and, bizarrely, a photocopy of a map that didn't even include my street. My lawyer stayed calm, letting her dig the hole deeper. Then it was our turn. We started with the plat map and deed, showing my property's clear boundary lines outside of Oak Pines HOA. The judge raised an eyebrow. Karen interrupted, insisting, "That map is outdated. He belongs under my rules." The room went silent. Even the bailiff looked like he was suppressing a smile. The judge leaned forward and said, "Mrs. White, are you aware that Mr. Collins' property is not listed in your association's covenants?" Her face flushed, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Karen's momentary hesitation evaporated as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a louder, almost frantic tone. "Your Honor, with all due respect, that plat map is wrong. Our community has been functionally enforcing standards on his property for years," she declared, tapping her stack of papers with a manicured nail. "If we don't maintain cohesion across property lines, the whole neighborhood's value drops." The judge, clearly unimpressed, adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. White, this court does not adjudicate functional jurisdiction. It adjudicates actual legal boundaries." He gestured to our documents. "And I see no evidence tying Mr. Collins' property to your HOA." Karen's jaw tightened. "But he uses our amenities," she shot back. That one made me laugh out loud. "I've never set foot inside your gated pool," I said. "And unless you count walking my dog on the county road, I've never used anything of yours." My lawyer slid a photo across to the judge, an overhead satellite image highlighting my house's distance from Oak Pines gates. "Your Honor," he said evenly, "Mr. Collins would need to trespass across 3 other properties just to reach their so-called amenities. This claim is not only baseless, it's absurd." Karen's eyes darted to her evidence, and I saw the beginnings of panic flicker there. But she wasn't ready to surrender. Instead, she pulled out what she clearly thought was her trump card, a sheet of paper bearing an official-looking HOA header and a blurry signature. "This," she announced dramatically, "is the membership acknowledgement Mr. Collins signed when he bought his home." She handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. I leaned forward, curious, because I had never signed anything of the sort. The judge glanced at it, frowned, and held it closer. "Mrs. White, this signature is pixelated. It appears to be a printed copy, not an original document. And the date, this says 2012. Mr. Collins, when did you purchase your home?" "March of last year," I replied. The entire courtroom seemed to collectively inhale. Karen's face went pale, then flushed red. "It must be a clerical error," she stammered. My lawyer seized the moment. "Your Honor, we contend this is not a clerical error, but a fabricated document created to falsely claim jurisdiction over my client. We would like to request a closer examination of the HOA's records." The judge's expression hardened. "Mrs. White, where did you obtain this?" She hesitated, glancing at the 2 board members beside her, both of whom looked like they wanted to sink into their chairs and disappear. One of the board members, a middle-aged man in a navy suit, finally spoke up, his voice low but clear. "Your Honor, that document wasn't approved by the board. I've never seen it before today." Karen's head whipped toward him, her mouth opening in shock. "Greg, what are you?" "I'm telling the truth, Karen," he interrupted firmly. "We have enough legitimate work to do without going after properties we don't own. This was your idea from the start." The second board member, a younger woman with a pinched look, nodded reluctantly. "She told us he was a member because it was better for the community if we expanded coverage." I didn't know she was actually going to forge documents. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Karen's lips moved soundlessly for a moment before she snapped, "You're both overreacting. We have to enforce standards or the neighborhood will fall apart." The judge raised a hand. "Mrs. White, enough. You are now on the verge of perjury. I strongly suggest you consider your next words carefully." That silenced her, for the moment. At that point, the atmosphere in the room shifted. This was no longer just a petty HOA dues dispute, this was shaping up to be a case about fraud and abuse of authority. The judge ordered a short recess so he could review the supposed membership acknowledgement more closely. During the break, Karen paced like a caged animal, throwing sharp whispers at the board members who had just publicly turned against her. My lawyer leaned over to me and said, "She's finished. Even if the judge doesn't push for criminal charges, this case is dead in the water." I still couldn't quite believe it. This woman had dragged me through months of harassment, legal threats, and now a courtroom spectacle, all because she wanted to expand her little fiefdom. When the judge returned, he looked directly at Karen. "Mrs. White, the court is now in possession of compelling evidence suggesting you knowingly submitted falsified documentation. You will have an opportunity to explain this before I render judgment." Her face was a mask of fury and fear. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't have a ready comeback. That silence, in a room that had been nothing but tension and noise for over an hour, was the sweetest sound I'd heard all year. The judge's voice carried the kind of calm weight that made the room feel smaller. "Mrs. White, I'll be blunt, this court does not take kindly to fabricated evidence. If I determine you have knowingly falsified documents to bring a fraudulent claim, you will be subject to penalties far exceeding the $4,700 you're demanding here." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, I thought she might finally back down. But then, in true Karen fashion, she straightened her shoulders and said, "Your Honor, I was only acting in the best interest of our community. This man's property affects our neighborhood whether or not the paperwork says so." The judge leaned forward, his gaze sharpening. "That is not how the law works. This country is not governed by your interpretation of property rights. It is governed by actual statutes and recorded deeds." He tapped the fraudulent document with his pen. "And this is not a deed, nor is it a contract signed by Mr. Collins. It is, at best, a fabricated form. At worst, it is evidence of intentional fraud." Karen swallowed hard, but instead of conceding, she muttered, "Sometimes you have to bend the rules to protect what's yours." That was the wrong thing to say. I saw the judge's patience finally run out. "Bend the rules," he repeated, his voice rising ever so slightly. "Mrs. White, you are in a court of law, not in an HOA meeting where you can bully residents into submission. This isn't about your personal feelings or your so-called standards, it's about facts and legal standing. And you have neither." My lawyer seized the opportunity to twist the knife. "Your Honor, we have reason to believe Mrs. White has a pattern of targeting properties outside her jurisdiction, sending intimidating notices to residents who have no legal obligation to her HOA, in the hopes they'll pay out of fear or confusion. I have here sworn statements from 2 other property owners in the area who experienced the same harassment." He slid the affidavits across the table. The judge's expression darkened as he read, "Mrs. White, you may have just escalated this beyond small claims. This is beginning to look like a scheme to obtain money under false pretenses." The bailiff shifted his stance, as if anticipating where this might be headed. Karen's composure cracked. "They're lying, all of them," she burst out, her voice carrying through the courtroom. "Do you have any idea how hard it is to keep property values up? People like him," she pointed a trembling finger at me, "think they can just do whatever they want, and it drags us all down." The judge's gavel came down hard. "Enough." The sharp crack echoed in the hushed room. "This is not about property values. This is about the law. And right now, Mrs. White, you have given me nothing to suggest that you have any legal authority over Mr. Collins or his property." He looked over at the 2 board members, who were now sitting stiffly, avoiding Karen's gaze. "Frankly, I'm surprised either of you agreed to this lawsuit." Greg, the man in the navy suit, cleared his throat. "We didn't, Your Honor. She acted alone." The judge nodded slowly. "Noted." Karen turned toward them, betrayal flashing across her face, but neither would meet her eyes. The hammer blow came in the judge's next words. "Given the evidence, or lack thereof, and the troubling indications of falsified documents, this court is dismissing the plaintiff's claim in its entirety, with prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering that this matter be referred to the county prosecutor's office for review of potential criminal charges." The room seemed to freeze. Karen's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. The bailiff stepped forward instinctively, as though expecting an outburst. My lawyer leaned toward me and whispered, "That's game over for her." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, mixed with disbelief that this nightmare was finally ending. Karen sat down heavily, staring at the table in front of her, the smug certainty she'd worn for months completely gone. The judge gathered his papers and gave me a small nod before standing to leave. As the courtroom began to empty, I caught a glimpse of Karen's face, red, tight-lipped, and radiating a hatred that told me she wasn't going to apologize, not now, not ever. But that didn't matter. She'd been exposed, publicly and officially, and there was no undoing it. The week after the court hearing felt almost surreal. For months, my life had been a steady drumbeat of letters, threats, and tension every time I pulled into my driveway. Now, the silence was deafening, and glorious. But the judge's words still echoed in my mind, referred to the county prosecutor's office. That wasn't just courtroom theater, it was a real possibility. That Karen could face criminal charges. My lawyer called me 3 days later to confirm it. The prosecutor had already opened a preliminary investigation. They've requested copies of all the letters she sent you, he said. And not just you, apparently those other property owners we mentioned have also submitted theirs. This is looking more and more like a pattern of harassment and attempted fraud. It was one thing to see Karen humiliated in court, but the thought of her actually being held legally accountable lit a different kind of fire in me. I wasn't out for vengeance, I just wanted her to stop. Permanently. Word traveled fast in our small town, especially when it involved someone as notorious as Karen. By the end of the week, Oak Pines HOA's monthly meeting had turned into a full-blown mutiny. Greg, the board member in the navy suit, called me to tell me the details. Half the residents are demanding she resign, he said. The other half are asking how much this lawsuit cost them in legal fees. She tried to spin it as you being a danger to the neighborhood, but after the hearing transcript went public, that story died fast. I pictured her standing in that meeting, voice rising, hands waving, trying to reclaim control, only to be met with cold stares and whispered accusations. It was ironic. She had spent years obsessing over property values, yet she had just tanked her own standing in the very community she claimed to protect. Several neighbors from Oak Pines even reached out to me directly, apologizing for her behavior, though most admitted they'd been too afraid to speak up before. The prosecutor's investigation moved quickly, thanks in part to Karen's own paper trail. Those official violation notices she sent. The county investigator confirmed they weren't just overreach, they were illegal attempts to demand payment without proper authority. Combined with the falsified membership acknowledgement, the evidence painted a clear picture. By the end of the month, Karen was formally charged with 2 misdemeanor counts, harassment and filing false documents. It wasn't jail time, at least not yet, but it was enough to force her into mandatory court supervision and strip her of any official position in the HOA. The image of her being served in her own driveway, the same way she had sent certified letters to me, was poetic justice. I didn't attend the hearing for her charges, I didn't need to. I already knew the outcome. The prosecutor told me later she'd pled guilty to avoid a trial, part of the agreement being that she'd have zero contact with me or my property ever again. Life returned to normal in slow, quiet ways. The mailbox stopped spitting out fake violation notices. The air around my home felt lighter, freer. Sometimes I'd catch sight of Karen's car on the road, and while she still refused to look at me, I could tell the swagger was gone. Her reign of petty tyranny had ended, not with the control she craved, but with a court record and a fractured reputation. I kept every document from the ordeal, the forged acknowledgement, the violation letters, even the court transcript, in a neat folder in my desk drawer. Not out of paranoia, but as a reminder. People like Karen thrive on intimidation and the hope that you'll roll over. But if you stand your ground, if you make them prove their claims in the cold light of law, they can't hide behind their titles or their false authority. The day the prosecutor closed the case, I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, looking out over my yard. My property, my rules, and not a single law standard in sight.